Now, I'm going to assume you've already read Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. If you haven't, read it, come back. If not, and you haven't read it, maybe take this in and read it from a little bit of a different perspective. What I'm going to do is propose here an alternate view to one of the characters, and that is Professor Angell. While reading the story again and again, I kind of discovered there were certain things about him that might not exactly be on the surface. Lovecraft really enjoyed writing stories where he would, through one or two words, really change the meaning of the character. But it was so subtle. We see this in Whisper in the Darkness and Haunter in the Dark as the man goes mad. We see a lot of subtlety, believe it or not. And here, this might be his most subtle attempt at affecting a character ever. What I'm going to try to show here is that Professor Angell, although in 1908 discovered the Cthulhu cult almost accidentally by attending a meeting, he was not just trying to research the cult eventually. He was actually trying to join it. Let's dig into the text and see where I'm coming up with these ideas. And to make sure there weren't any errors or mistakes in the texts I studied, I grabbed multiple copies of different publishers, and I'm pretty much very confident that this is the perfect text I'm studying. Before I state why I believe he is trying to join the cult, we need to look at why perhaps he was a poor candidate to join the Cthulhu group. One was he was somewhat popular. In fact, Lovecraft states that his death was recalled by many. So he was a popular guy, which this cult did not want anything to do with. He was also an intellectual. He had a PhD in Semitic languages. So they often wanted these idiots, just blindly gibbering idiots, to join the cult who would do whatever it took, including murder, and be able to slip in and out without any notice. Another thing we see is that Professor Angell never once receives any dream message from Cthulhu. His cultists are far more sensitive to the dream vibrations. Although young sculptor Wilcox has many of these dreams, which he creates the clay bas relief. Although Professor Angell can't receive these dreams, he sure is fascinated with Wilcox. Upon the first meeting of Wilcox and Angell, Angell first shoos him off as sort of an imposter or fraud. But then, after the story is told to him, he completely believes the sculptor. In fact, after he talks to the professor for a bit, Lovecraft writes, "It was then that he began a rambling tale which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle." The sleeping memory, of course, is that bas relief in 1908. Once winning favor with the professor, Wilcox is then barraged with a battery of questions by the doctor. It is then in the text that he reveals that he might be looking for something a little more than information. The conversation between the professor and the sculptor, of course, is recalled through a first-person narrative. Now, in that narrative, the interviewer talks to Wilcox in person, and Wilcox tells him a few things. "My uncle blamed his old age," Wilcox afterwards said, "for his slowness in recognizing both hieroglyphics and pictorial design. Many of his questions seemed highly out of place to this visitor, especially those which tried to connect the latter with strange cults or societies." Now, here is the really important part. And Wilcox could not understand the repeated promises of silence which he was offered in exchange for an admission of membership in some widespread mystical or paganly religious body. Wilcox is far from a cult member. He's just a poor soul that happened to receive these awful dreams and was able to create bas reliefs and other artwork to get him out of his head for the time being. Quite quickly, the professor becomes convinced that this poor soul knows nothing about the cults. However, he besieges his visitor with demands for future reports of dreams, and this bore regular fruit, for after the first interview, the manuscript records daily calls of the young man. And this goes on for a while until, of course, Relay sets back into the ocean. By the 2nd of April, 1925, Relay is sunk back in, and Wilcox, quote, "To Professor Angell, he was of no further assistance." Interesting word right there, assistance. And Lovecraft's way too much of a craftsman writer to just frivolously choose words. He used that word assistance very particularly. Assistance, yes, in his research, but was it assistance in something else as well? And why did the professor feel the need to keep a key on his person at all time that locked the Cthulhu file? No one knew he had that stuff. Something else was going on. As you know, the professor's death was not by natural causes. He did not have a heart attack walking up a hill. But before we study his death, or even if we need to study his death, let's look at where he was coming from before it all happened. The professor returned to Providence from the Newport boat, which was pretty much a daily steamship route that ran from Providence to Newport and back. It circled and stopped at several places along the way. It's not known what he was doing at 92 years old on this boat. However, he would have passed Fort Wetherill, which is considered the most haunted place now in all of Rhode Island. That's an interesting point. How much that point has to do with our subject, I don't know, but it's still kind of an interesting thing. And of course, Lovecraft was such a fan of local horror and legend, especially in the Providence, Rhode Island area. He would have certainly been well aware of all the legends that went on in that bay, and there are many. So I think there was a wink and a nod here from Lovecraft that something else was also going on. And again, the professor's 92 years old, still going around. What is he still searching for? And as we do know, the cult eventually finds him and tops him off, walking up a hill. So, in conclusion, he was not a prime member. They didn't want him. He was still trying to investigate. And as far as I can tell, I think he was still trying to infiltrate the cult, not to study it, but to actually join it. He was just, his interest was so fevered when it came to this cult, far more than anyone else at that 1908 convention he attends when he first comes in contact with the Call of Cthulhu statue. He's an interesting character. Now, I'm not saying I am correct. I'm not saying this is the correct reading. I'm just putting it out there for everyone to think about, food for thought, and come back with your own ideas. I'd like to hear them. All right. So until we meet again, my friends, it's the Great Bohemian. Please, as the kids say, like and subscribe because I need it. Over and out.